Welcome to ONNpoint. I'm Tim Murphy, and I'm very honored to have Jenny Migaud in the studio with me today. Jenny Migaud is an advocate for families and for victims of PTSD.
Military PTSD.
Military PTSD. There we go. Post-traumatic stress disorder. You hail from Trois-Rivières, is that right?
Trois-Rivières, exactly, located right between Quebec City and Montreal, yes.
And you're in Sault-Ste-Marie because you are working as an advocate right now, is that correct?
Right on. I'm making that tour of Northern Ontario in order to meet families and veterans also, in order to understand a little bit more about the challenges they are confronted living here, for instance, and also deliver a message of hope, talking about military PTSD, but also the new measure that is accessible to veterans since April 1st, named the Caregiver Recognition Benefit offered by Veterans Affairs Canada.
And that's near and dear to you because you were a caregiver.
I am a caregiver.
And you are a caregiver.
And I was for the past 17 years now, yes.
You're a caregiver in your capacity as a best friend now to or others as well.
Yes, my ex-husband, we divorced 2 years ago, but he's still suffering, still very much isolated, doing much better though, but I'm still in his life and he's still in mine. He's my best friend because, of course, I mean, we went through that adventure of advocacy together, and we still believe in the cause because we know that there's a necessity here among the veterans and families in order to have a better quality of life for them. This is a real challenge, yes.
Jenny, can we back up to your personal experience? Will you share some of that story with us? I know that this is more about advocacy and about education and awareness and offering assistance and help, but I think it would be great for our audience just to hear a little bit about what happened in your life that this came upon you. Your ex-husband, at that time was your husband.
Yes.
Which branch of the military was he serving?
He was in Air Force. He was a load master. He served on the CC-130.
Old master?
Yeah. Oh, load master.
Oh,
load? Yes,
okay.
load master.
A load master.
He was loading the CC-130.
I'm sorry, my English is terrible.
But yes, and he served in Syria and Haiti for 17 consecutive months.
17 consecutive months?
Yes, back then in 96, 97. So it was really traumatic for him. It was very difficult, and this is where most of his trauma comes from, yeah.
17 consecutive months sounds like an extraordinarily long period of time. Is that unusual?
A little bit, yes.
It is a little bit.
Yes.
Is there a certain length now that they stop tours at, or when you get to come home at some point, or does it just go and go like that? Is that?
Usually we talk about between 6 to 9 months.
6 to 9 months would be the ideal to not, once you're 6 to 9 months, get out and debrief and, do the self-care.
Yes.
Before going back again, but not for him, 17 months.
17 months, yes.
Okay, so did he come home after that?
Yes, he did, as a matter of fact, but he was already wounded. Fact is, he came back from this tour in 97, but he was officially diagnosed with PTSD in 2007, which is the reality of many vets.
So 10 years?
Oh, yeah.
10 years between the time that he came home and the diagnosis?
Yes. So do you know what that meant?
No.
It meant that he was wounded. Okay, he was non-functional, but yet he had to continue to have a job. He was expecting to keep a job in the civilian world, and it made no sense. He had a lot of difficulty just adapting. Of course, he was wounded, so he was angry. He couldn't adapt to the civilian world, so it was really, really difficult for him. In fact, he had like 15 jobs in 3 years. And he had to work because when he retired, the military didn't recognize his wounds. So they told him that he was in perfect health. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a good life. And this is what happened. So he was under the impression that officially he was okay. Although when I met him in 2001, he was already suffering from terrible nightmares. But the diagnosis came many years later after actually someone told him about Veterans Affairs Canada who could help him.
So he came back and was not even aware of the resources that were available because he was told he was healthy. So he didn't think that he needed to look into any assistance.
And he didn't want to recognize.
He didn't want to recognize.
Of course not.
Well, because that's a huge part of mental illness is that you don't. And is it fair to call PTSD a mental illness? Is that a fair?
I like to call it a wound.
A
a wound, because it means you are somebody, then something happened there, then there's a change. So to me, it's a wound.
Okay.
It's like losing your legs.
Well,
you had
that's
two
why
legs.
it's trauma.
Yes, exactly. A lot of people refer to it as an illness, but to me, I mean, it's not empowering to talk about an illness. Okay. When you talk about a wound, okay, you think about healing. Thank you very much. And having a quality of life. So, of course, PTSD differs from one person to another. Some are less affected and some are a lot affected. The real challenge for them, okay, is to find that quality of life. And the quality of life is found with financial security.
Yes.
Of course, if you cannot work, okay, you need to be able to put the bread on the table.
Yes.
An environment that makes sense, okay, with people understanding and being empowered regarding your own symptoms, because the real challenge is to learn how to go in that emotional, thing and talk about stuff, which is not easy for someone who served many years, because of course, I mean, the military culture is specific, right? So the challenge is huge for those serving members who are leaving the Canadian Armed Forces, yes.
Jenny, we have to take a quick break. We only take about a minute commercial here on ONNpoint, so we'll be right back after this. We've got so much more to talk about, and about the different forms, the different ways that PTSD can affect different people. I'd like to talk a little bit about that as well. So stay with us on Point. We'll be back with Jenny Migaud talking about PTSD right after this. We're back with Jenny Migaud. Jenny, I noticed that you're very specific when you refer to it as military post-traumatic stress disorder. And that makes sense now that I think about it, because people who suffer from sexual assault, that's a different kind of post-traumatic stress disorder, from spousal abuse, right?
Exactly.
So there are all kinds of different PTSD.
It's important to say that pain is pain. Okay, it's all leading to the same place, the same emotion, but the way it expresses, it's very different from one person to another.
And would that then also indicate that the treatment is different from one person to another? Obviously, I mean, when you treat PTSD, you have to treat an individual, not the illness. Is that right? I mean, you're treating the wound.
It's so complex
because
you're treating PTSD. A lot of the time, you will also be treating, for instance, major depression. Okay, so that's the thing. I think what is important is that therapy makes sense to the individual.
Okay.
I think this is it.
Yeah.
And it requires some kind of flexibility from the government.
Okay.
Okay, for instance, the Native community,
yes,
those who served, okay, also don't always recognize themselves in the treatments that are offered to them, because their cultural belief is different.
Yes.
And as I said, it has to make sense. Okay, this is how you create the interchange that will make someone work in order to get better and feel better and just function, okay, like the more normally possible.
Yeah, we also talked about the fact that even with treatment and even with time, the trauma never goes away.
I know.
And I talked about this. We have a group in town called Women in Crisis, and they talk about the trauma that women have gone through in abusive relationships, and the fact that with counseling, with treatment, you can now see through your trauma. You can work your way through it. There's a light and there's hope. The treatment can help. Healing can help you find hope again. It teaches you how to deal with everything. There are lessons. There are tools. You self-talk, conversations. But the trauma is always still there.
The trauma is always there.
You learn to live with it. You learn to cope.
Yes, and you have to learn how to trust. Okay?
Yes.
You have to learn how to trust. More than just seeing your wounds, okay, in that specific case, it would be learning how to trust and being conscious. So you have to continuously work on your symptoms, because when it comes to military PTSD, just like other kinds of PTSD, let's be clear about it. But when we talk about military PTSD, the triggers, okay, comes from everywhere. Diesel,
The smell
the
of
sun,
diesel.
even the sun can be a trigger. Okay, anything. So it's so different from one person to another, and sometimes they don't even know the origin of the trigger. All they know is that at some point they're going very wrong. So they have a huge anxiety attack, or they become very angry.
Angry, violent even sometimes.
At sometimes, I mean, let's not forget that some people die because of PTSD, okay, either by suicide or murder.
Oh. My nephew, I mentioned off camera
Yes.
that my nephew served in Afghanistan, and he also suffered with PTSD, and he had religious persecution. So he was having nightmares, and that was something that also rang true for your ex. Is that true?
Exactly, at some level, you know, I mean, for those who served in Afghanistan, what I heard on many occasions is the fact that when they got off that plane, they felt like they were back in time 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
And this is how huge the shock is. But my specialty is more the nature of the wound now at home,
Okay.
back at home,
Right.
with the caregivers. Because what happened there, no matter what the mission is, either it was in Bosnia, Syria, Haiti, Afghanistan, you know, us as a civilian will never know completely what happened over there. And most of the time, they don't talk so openly about, unless between them.
Right, right.
Okay, but for us civilian, it's another world that belongs to them. I think we have a responsibility to at least develop the empathy for those people, okay, without having pity on them, because they don't need that.
They don't need
It's
pity.
not what they want,
No.
it's not what they need. They need to be understood and respected, and then we're helping them. We have to make our home a safe home for them.
When we come back, I want to talk about the obstacles that you encountered as you tried to get the help that your ex-husband and you as a caregiver needed
Yes.
and deserved, and that wasn't there at the ready for you. We'll talk about that struggle coming up next. Stay with us on point as we talk to Jenny Migaud and her advocacy for families that are struggling through PTSD, military PTSD. Be right back after this. I'm learning. So Jenny, now we're at the point in the story where it's apparent that you need help, that your ex-husband needs help, and that you as a caregiver needs help, and you're having a really hard time negotiating through the system. Is this correct?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Take me to that.
You're bringing me back a
I'm
few
okay.
years ago, but
Yeah.
you know what? We need to talk about it, because this is the reality of caregivers. And so basically, as for me, I was 7 years, okay, so for 7 years, my ex-husband saw a psychiatrist. He was prescribed new pills every 6 weeks, basically, okay, an adjustment of this and a little bit more of that and less of this. So basically, for 7 years, no one asked me how he was doing with the medication. No one asked me what I was going through myself or our 4 children.
Oh.
Okay, so I mean, and as for me, I mean, I remember, and so clearly, because those memories, you never forget them. I mean, seeing my ex-husband, you know, lying down on the floor in our basement, just crying and shaking because of the result of the new medication, and crying because he didn't want to have his wife see him cry like this and be so vulnerable.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But of course, I mean, when you deal with 2, 3, 4 nightmares a week, a day, sometimes a night, okay, it never stops actually, and you have to get up in the morning and have your job and take care of the kids and everything. I mean, at one point, you deal continuously with the anger, okay, and at one point, you really become the collateral damage because you become isolated.
Yes.
Okay, you are in a position where you always keep defending your husband. It seems like you're the only one who keeps seeing the good person behind the military uniform, okay? And this is becoming, at one point, very difficult and very heavy on someone's shoulder. Being the only one is a privilege, but it's also a huge burden when you don't receive any help and support yourself. So I wasn't getting any education. No one actually explained to me what was military PTSD back then. So of course I became very angry when I realized, because at one point I tried to go back to school in order to save a little bit of what was left of our family. So I went back into social services. I did only one session because I had to go back home, right?
Yeah.
But when I went back to school, very briefly, what I understood at one point is that I had to wear a caregiver hat at one point. Okay, instead of always talking to my husband and trying to deal with my husband, no, I realized that at times I was dealing with my husband and at times I was dealing with PTSD. Okay, so
Yes.
education for me at one point made a lot of sense, but there was nothing out there. And as I said, I mean, how many times did I try to call for help for my husband, even at the OSI clinic where he was treated?
What's OSI stand for?
Operational Stress Injury Clinic,
Okay.
dedicated to the military and veterans community. And they wouldn't even listen to me. I was really left alone. I was really left alone doing the best that I could, dealing with something I couldn't understand.
Right.
So that's when I tried to talk to the minister, back then, Minister Fantino.
Julian Fantino.
Yes.
He was the Minister of...
Veterans Affairs back then in
Yes.
2014.
So,
And I wanted basically just to talk to him and tell him that I needed education to properly love my husband. Okay, because it's all about love, right?
Yes.
And he ignored me in front of the TV, so that's how I became an advocate.
That's how, and that's sort of the infamous part of your story.
Yes.
Was that exposure, the national exposure you got from chasing him down the hallway when he literally ignored you.
Yeah, and it was a strong symbolism of what the system, how the system was treating the caregivers back then, and even the veterans, of course.
And I mentioned to you again off camera also that my nephew at the time, now it's his wife, but at the time was his girlfriend, I think maybe, I don't even know if she was a fiance then. But she was, like you, collateral damage, and she had to start looking at her own self-care.
Yeah.
Because once again, not taught, not qualified, not knowing what to do as a caregiver, and the resources so hard to come by.
Yeah.
And not just resources for yourself, but resources for your ex-husband that he was not even aware of.
Oh, and we didn't talk about the children. The forgotten of the forgotten are most definitely the children. They have no voice. They basically have no voice.
And they're as involved in this as anybody. They're right there watching it happen. They're living it.
Do you know how many caregivers I know who are 15 years old? I mean, they live with their single parent, okay? And they're the one they rely on.
So, so Julian Fantino ignored you.
Yeah.
And which made you even more determined to be heard.
Oh, yeah. And it gave me great opportunities to be heard too in the media, for instance, because it made sense to the media, but it made sense to the population as well. So I was contacted like overnight from coast to coast. And for the past 4 years, this has been my life. Trying to help and you know, visiting the country and trying to understand the challenge and most of all, trying to help.
How can you getting
afford?
Yeah.
That's the money, right? Question, you know what? This is my privilege. A privilege that no one I know has actually. I'm supported by both my ex-husband and my current spouse who really believe in what I do, because without them, now I have to be working 40 hours a week. So I do speeches, so I do have a little money on my own, but basically I cannot charge a veteran or a family because I know damn too well what they're going through.
Yeah.
And I know that most of the time they don't have any money. So, I mean, psychologically, I cannot charge. But those men in my life support my action because I know that I'm determined to make a change and to create that change.
Okay, we're going to take another quick commercial break. When we come back, I want to pick up with where we are today.
Yes.
Where the advocacy has led you.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about some of those resources that are available that people may not know about,
Yeah.
especially for caregivers now.
Yes.
Okay, so once again, stay with us on point. We'll be right back after this brief message. Jenny, I want to talk a little bit about finances for people who are suffering from military PTSD. As with any kind of an issue where you're not able to work, whether it's for mental illness or physical health or whatever, if there is something that prevents you from working and you at the same time need to get healthy, it's very difficult to do those things when you don't have a roof over your head or food on the table. You need to, when you're dealing with trying to get well, your focus needs to be on trying to get well, not worrying about trying to pay the bills or, right. So one of the struggles then is when somebody comes back from serving and they can't hold down a job because of their post-traumatic stress disorder.
You mean they're being kicked out of the army because they are, yes, okay.
Right. So now, and then now you're a caregiver and suddenly your full-time job is making sure that you're taking care of this person. Where is the money coming from? Now, for a while, you guys struggled so much to try to make those ends meet because you couldn't find the resources or the resources didn't exist.
Yeah, they didn't exist. No, we weren't recognized. I mean, major steps have been done, I mean, in the past few years.
So where are we now as far as that kind of support that you've been fighting for and advocating for? Have we've made some progress?
Well, to make a long story short, actually, now since April 1st, caregivers can have access to what Veterans Affairs called the Caregiver Recognition Benefit. Now, let's be clear. It's not a compensation measure. So it's not made for you to compensate the fact that you don't have a paycheck anymore. It's a recognition, meaning that now you can have as a caregiver, and this is, a big win, a $1,000 check monthly given to your name. Okay, in order to help you, because of course, just like when I visit my ex-husband, myself, okay, I mean, I have to pay gas in order to go visit him, and we go out in order to make him leave the house a little bit, so on, so there are expenses, so that measure is there. Well, the problem is, it's not accessible for those who have PTSD. My message is, apply for it, okay, apply for it, although the criterias makes it totally inaccessible, okay? Apply for it. We're working on it, but Veterans Affairs needs to know how many caregivers there are in this country because this is something we don't know.
Okay, so we need the voices, this is what you're saying, the voices need to be heard. And the way the voices are heard are by speaking to the government officials and saying, I need you to know that I am here and I need help and this is what I require from you. And then they're gonna go, oh, wow, holy onslaught of people that are looking for funding because this is the reality. Yes.
Well, now, for the past few months, now veterans can contact their MFRC, Military Family Resource Centers. There's one in North Bay, actually.
Okay.
Call them. Okay, call them. You can access services from them, which are important and are life-changing on so many levels. But financially speaking, we're still not where we need to be. For sure.
And that's not just, we're talking about funds for support, like to learn, education, awareness for caregivers, training for caregivers, support, financial support for the PTSD survivors.
You know what I keep saying? If there's a machine that can transform a civilian into a serving member, there could be a machine transforming a civilian into a caregiver of a veteran with PTSD.
Well, that was well said.
But it's the reality. We can be trained. I mean, we all know that service dogs also make a huge difference, okay? And it's a joke, but it's not a joke. It's like, make me a service dog. Train me.
Train me.
I can be trained, okay? I mean, I can be trained. This is a wound that can be understood, okay? And you can be trained to wear your caregiver hat, okay, in order to just have that quality of life, protect yourself from the collateral damage, and most of all, be the ally to someone who's suffering instead of becoming his worst enemy. because I love that person, because that person loves me, I have a lot of power. Unfortunately, veterans are still committing suicide. And why? Because they end up alone. Why? Because we are uneducated to deal with them and to make them feel loved and worthy.
Jenny, that's our time. Now, is there any last words you wanted to say? Is there information? We know you already said Veterans Affairs.
Yes.
Contact if you are...
The MFRC in North Bay.
MFRC in North Bay, and then also your local politicians.
Yes, and find me on Facebook if you need more information.
And find Jenny Migaud, and that's M-I-G-E-A...
No, G-N-E...
M-I-N-G...
N-E-A-U-L-T. M-I-G-N-E-A-U-L-T. Good
oh,
job.
Mignot. M-I-G-N-E-A-U-L-T.
Got it.
Mignot. I had to get it in my head. Look, now I'm bilingual because I can say Mignot. I can say merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
And thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
That's been our time. Jenny Mignot, M-I-G-N-E-A-U-L-T on Facebook. And we'll be back with more On Point tomorrow night. Thanks for joining us tonight. Bye for now.